Hello, everyone. This is Gene Geog History, and I've gone through many of the Jamaican racial/ethnic groups through the past several videos, and I'm going to continue that with talking about the Indo-Jamaican people and what they are, which makes sense. I really somewhat touched on them in the Douglas Jamaican video, but this video is specifically going to be focused on the Indo or the Indian Jamaicans. But before we get there, we need to go through the backstory and figure out what are Indo-Jamaicans or Indian Jamaicans. So, what are Indo-Jamaicans? Indo-Jamaicans are Jamaican people who descend from Europeans, essentially. So, either they came to Jamaica directly from India, like they were born in India, then they moved to Jamaica, or they were born in Jamaica and descend from Indians who migrated to Jamaica, but their lineage comes from India or the Indian subcontinent. And I'm mentioning the Indian subcontinent because when they came from the Indian subcontinent to Jamaica, India wasn't the India that it is now, meaning there was no Pakistan or Bangladesh. All of them were included in India. So that's who they are, and I kind of mentioned the main mixtures, which is the Dougla. I'm not including them here. I'm talking about people who are mostly or fully Indian, but they're just Jamaican in their nationality, creating an ethnogenesis of Indo-Jamaicans. And they form their own racial group in Jamaica due to being Indian, essentially. So, Indo-Jamaicans became a thing once Jamaica went on emancipation from the British. And there's also a lot going on in British India as well, where the socio economy wasn't doing so well. So there was the system created called Indentured Servitude, where pretty much they decided that to replicate or to replace the former slaves, they were going to essentially hire people from India to come over to Jamaica to take their spots. So the slaves were emancipated in 1838 in Jamaica, but through the next 7 years, they realized that they didn't really have a replacement system for this. And due to the weakening socioeconomy in India and them not wanting Jamaica to go down, and for the British to retain some sort of control so their colonies don't go under, indentured servitude was created. And due to this, they got people mainly from northern India in places like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and some other places like Bhojpur and Adwa in the Hindi belt, as well as other places in North India, though there was a minority that did come from South India. And on my personal ancestry tests, it showed both northern and southern India, so I guess that's not surprising. So the labor shortage was already addressed, which is why they, as well as Chinese Jamaicans, eventually became a thing. But when it comes to their role as indentured servants, obviously they were brought to Jamaica to mainly work on the plantations because that was one of the main things Jamaica was used for when it comes to colonialism. And this was in exchange for the indentured servants to get wages, housing, food, and sometimes the promise of land or to return to their land after their term ended. Though that became relatively problematic in execution since a lot of them didn't return to India after their term ended, whether it was by choice or there was a lack of votes. That could be something that we get into eventually somewhere down the road. And the wages were relatively non existent or a lot lower than what they expected. So there's issues with that, as well as the housing and the food. So obviously they arrived first in 1845, and they'd continue for like the next 70 to 80 years, though the first ship that they came to Jamaica on was called the Maidstone. So, with this, they brought their cultural practices like their religions, Hinduism and Islam, as well as Indian food, with the most infamous or the most known example is roti, that is heavily used in Jamaica today. And there are also other customs and wardrobe and stuff like that that they brought too. So the work that they did involved several roles, like cooks, gardeners, housekeepers, field workers, and general laborers. And their living conditions were essentially horrible, with little to no pay, and they were subjugated to physical punishment from their masters. So obviously they had conflict with the white Jamaicans, and there was a lot of conflict between the black Jamaicans as well, because they were the minority compared to the majority Black Jamaicans, but they also brought along their colorism and racism to Jamaica. So, despite this, they thought that they were better than Black Jamaicans due to them not being Black. And there's so many other nuances that I could get into, but that's just me summing it up very briefly. So, obviously, there are a lot of issues with the indentured servitude. One of them is while there were contracts that they did read, a lot of them weren't in English, and obviously, a lot of the Indian indentured servants didn't understand it. One, because they either didn't speak English, or two, the English in India and the English in Jamaica are two completely different things. So that's one of the issues. So it was very easy for the Indo-Jamaicans to be ripped off. And while most of them planned to return to India originally, the planters essentially lobbied the Jamaican government to allow them to stay and to defray their settlement costs, essentially to save money so they don't have to do their own work and so they don't have to spend money to send them back to either Indo-Jamaicans back to the Indian subcontinent. And they were getting grants for all this stuff, and it just became more and more of a mess. Outside of that, regarding the settlement and the reparations and all that other stuff, there are a few issues when it comes to the lack of returning, or the issues with returning outside of the landowners just ripping them off. So, one major thing is that there are a lack of ships available to bring them back to India. So, if there's a lack of ships, that means they have to stay in Jamaica, essentially. And another issue, sorry. So, pretty much, another issue is that the ships wouldn't, the few ships that were there wouldn't leave unless the ship was full, but due to the landowners doing anything they can to keep the workers, they just kept more and more and more of them into Jamaica. Another issue is that the Indian government essentially didn't want them to come back, especially if it's been decades after decades after decades. And another element of this is that if these workers were destitute, ill, or had lost touch with their own culture, they didn't want them back. And that's one thing that I know for sure. I know a lot of Guyanese and Trinidadian people in my life, specifically Indo-Trinidadian and Indo-Guyanese people. And I've also dealt with my fair share of Indian people from India as well. The Indians in India do not claim the Indo-Guyanese and the Indo-Trinidadians because they lost their culture, they are so detached from them, and all of that jazz. So that mentality went to Indo-Jamaicans as well, regarding how they were treated back by people in their subcontinent. So in 1917, after a lot of pressure from freedom fighters and people within the British Indian community, indentured servitude officially ended in 1917, though they were kind of phasing it out beforehand, and only a few more ships made its way to and from Jamaica and to and from India due to that. And the journey of these indentured servants was marked by significant loss of life and the cultural exchange that occurred between their homelands and Jamaica. So, due to this, despite indentured servitude officially ending, a lot of them didn't go back to India, partially due to what I described earlier, with many people in India just not wanting them back. And another reason is that this took place within like 70 years. So some of these people literally spent their entire lives being indentured servants. Their children were indentured servants, so were their grandchildren. So they built a life for themselves in Jamaica, essentially. So the only place that was home for them is Jamaica. So what happened afterwards is a few things happened. One of them is that the Indo-Jamaicans essentially created their own towns, their own communities, their own customs, their own enclaves, and they would mainly stay there. And I believe Westmoreland is one of, if not the most popular areas for Indo-Jamaicans. A lot of them just intermarried and procreated within themselves, so they kept the bloodline pure, so that could also be due to the isms, where they didn't want to do with Afro Jamaicans, they didn't like the white Jamaicans, they didn't like the Chinese Jamaicans, they didn't like the mixed Jamaicans. So that was a part of it. And another part of it is that they wanted to keep their culture. And to them, doing that meant marrying your own. And it's not just their culture from India, it's also the parts that is in Jamaica as well. So essentially, they created their own ethnogenesis, i.e., the Indo-Jamaicans. And there are a few people who are just pure Indo-Jamaican today. So I want to go over the timeline of Indo-Jamaicans after indentureship. So from 1917 to 1930s, we have the transition to a free community. Obviously, this came to be due to the last indentured contracts expiring in 1917, thus making it null and void and extinct. So when it comes to land versus repatriation, around two-thirds stayed in Jamaica, though I mentioned earlier why that was the case. Many took land grants, forming small farming communities for themselves. When it comes to village life, Indo-Jamaicans lived in King Belt parishes in Clarendon, St. Catherine, and Westmoreland, and based off of the Indo-Jamaican ancestry that I do have, from what I've been told from my family, these areas are the ones that they're linked to. So they farmed rice, vegetables, and kept livestock. Religion and culture, so obviously Hinduism and Islam, they maintain. They also did festivals like Hosei and Diwali, which thrived in their communities, and they also built temples and mosques, with Bhojpuri and Hindi being spoken at home. So when it comes to relations, Afro-Jamaicans often saw them as outsiders or coolies. That's a term that they use. I didn't know this term was offensive until a few years ago, but I do remember a bunch of Caribbean people, not just Jamaicans, saying it. Indo-Jamaicans often remained insular, marrying within their group. I kind of mentioned this earlier. So when it comes to the 1940s and 1950s, there was gradual integration at this point. And based off of my family lineage, I know this is true just based off of when they were born. Anyways, when it comes to the educational push, Indo-Jamaican families invested heavily in schooling for upward mobility, and these missionary schools helped spread Christianity. I'm wondering if this was like their version of coercion, and by they I mean like the white Jamaicans. Anyways, business growth was huge as some moved into retail, small trade, and fishing, becoming shopkeepers in rural Jamaica. Cultural blending. So curry and roti are huge ones, as well as spice blends that enter mainstream Jamaican cooking that are present today. Indo-Jamaican drumming influences reggae and calypso music, and calypso also came from Trinidad and Tobago. Language shift. So, English and Jamaican Creole begins replacing Bhojpuri as a language that Indo-Jamaicans spoke, though Hindi was still upheld. Younger generations became bilingual or entirely Creole speaking. So, entertaining like Patois or mixing Patois and Hindi. Politics. There's still little formal political representation at this point, but Indo-Jamaicans do start appearing in unions and local councils. So, the 1960s and 1970s. So, this is when Jamaica became independent, and the main thing here is independence and identity. So Jamaica becomes independent in 1962, with Indo-Jamaicans being recognized as a part of the national fabric of Jamaica, though they are still kind of seen as separate as well. Intermarriage. So this became a lot more popular as mixed Afro and Indo marriages increased, especially in urban areas, creating a Douglas class. And this would be one of the reasons why the Indo-Jamaican population eventually or started to fall. Cultural visibility, so festivals like Diwali gain more public celebration. Curry goat becomes a national dish in Jamaica. The stereotypes still persist, though. Indo-Jamaicans still face caricatures as shopkeepers or miserly, while some Indo-Jamaicans held anti-black biases. So this was the conflict between the two groups that remained, and I briefly touched upon this in the Douglas video. I might make an independent video delving more into this. And here's another element migration. Some Indo Jamaicans migrate to the UK, Canada, and the US for better opportunities. So at this point in my family lineage, they are mainly Afro Jamaican, but both sides of my family migrated to the West and from Jamaica at around this point. And from the people I know, a lot of them did this as well. So it's not shocking that Indo Jamaicans essentially did the same thing. 1980s and 1990s, political and cultural recognition. When it comes to the politics, Indo-Jamaicans gained more visibility in parliament, unions, and business leadership at this point. When it comes to music and arts, Indo-Jamaican influence enters dancehall, reggae, and club through rhythms and instruments. Diaspora links. There's a stronger connection formed between Indo-Caribbean communities within Trinidad, Guyana, and Suriname. I knew this was the case for the Afro communities in these countries, but the Indo-Caribbean elements or the Indo-Caribbean descendants in these countries, I guess it makes sense there too. Identity balance. So they're increasingly seen as Jamaican first while still holding on to Indian heritage. So the slogan of Jamaica really became indebted in everyone at this point. And from the 2000s to present, full integration but minority status. So they are a minority community, with Indo-Jamaicans making up about 1 to 2% of Jamaica's population. Other sources mention that they are 3% of Jamaica's population, but their cultural impact is outsized, and they are currently the third most populous demographic in Jamaica. Blended identity. Curry, roti, chutney, Jose, and Diwali are national markers for Jamaican culture. Intermarriage is commonplace. Indo-Jamaican identity often blended into brown or mixed race categories. So the browning class, I somewhat mentioned this in that video as well as the Douglas video. Diaspora influence. Many Indo-Jamaicans abroad, especially in Canada, the United Kingdom, and the United States, help keep connections to both India and Jamaica alive. Representation. Today, Indo-Jamaicans are present in politics, sports, and entertainment, seen as part of the Jamaican national story. And that is it for this video pertaining Indo-Jamaicans. A lot of this information I definitely knew from my own research when I found out my ancestry result, and I wanted to look more into this demographic in Jamaica. A lot more of it that I knew just from interacting more with my family members and learning something and researching Indo-Jamaican people's experiences. Ironically enough, I know a lot more Indo-Trinidadian and Indo-Guyanese people, so I know about their experiences, whether just being diasporic from there, the culture, the customs, and all that. And while Jamaica doesn't have nearly as big of a Indo presence compared to Trinidad and Guyana, there are a lot of similarities between the three countries. I knew that from the Afro demographics in the countries, but the Indo demographics, it's definitely something that I see there too. And little things that I've always eaten and partaken in from that were Jamaican, I didn't know came from Indo-Jamaicans until a year or so ago. So I only have the Chinese Jamaicans left to cover. So that's definitely going to come out soon. I don't think there will be any other demographics that I'll cover after that pertaining Jamaica. So maybe after the Chinese Jamaicans, I will focus on the demographics in other Caribbean countries and then do compare contrast to some of the Jamaican counterparts and all of that. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll be back with more content soon.